who are connected today with us. Welcome to the second workshop organized by the Global Infrastructure Hub as part of the G20 infrastructure agenda under the Italian G20 Presidency. Just a few remarks on behalf of the Italian G20 Presidency. Now, it is widely recognized that circular economy and the implementation of its principles is key in achieving our climate goals. Circularity involves all major production and consumption sectors, as well as services, from energy to transport, buildings and waste. But more needs to be done to decouple economic growth from environmental pressures, reduce and reuse resources, extend their lifespan, and increase the use of regenerative raw materials. Now, infrastructure can play a crucial role in scaling up circular economy. We all know that it has a high impact on the environment due to material use, waste generation, and greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, infrastructure provides the facilities necessary for the concrete implementation of circular economy, for example, plans for waste management, sorting, and incineration. So there are clearly opportunities associated with circular economies that still need to be seized, especially in terms of technology integration and job creation. More generally, the implementation of circular economy principles to infrastructure may allow to go beyond a linear construction-led approach and bring significant climate change mitigation and resilience benefits. In Italy as well, a national strategy for circular economy was developed back in 2017. It has recently been updated and included in our National Recovery Resilience Plan, which has just been finalized a few days ago, also with the aim of creating a coherent and effective national strategic framework on circular economy to attract the investments needed. To conclude, I would like to sincerely thank the Global Infrastructure Hub for the continued support to the G20 work on infrastructure. And without further ado, I will stop here. Thank you for your attention. Marie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lawrence. And good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you. And thanks for taking the time to join us today for this important workshop in the G20 Infrastructure Working Group calendar. So I also would like to thank the G20 Italian Presidency and Lawrence and his team for their leadership to make this workshop possible today. So earlier this year, as you've heard from Lawrence, the IWG identified sustainable infrastructure as one of its priorities under the Italian Presidency. And the circular economy is a topic that will be covered under this agenda. So to support this priority, the Global Infrastructure Hub commenced an initiative to examine the role that infrastructure can play in a transition to a circular economy. And this comprised of three elements. The first was a thought piece on the role of infrastructure on the circular economy that identifies the opportunity for infrastructure to accelerate the circular economy. This piece was circulated to the IWG membership on the 16th of April. The second element is actually this workshop today. And the third element is a roadmap for infrastructure under a circular economy. And this draft roadmap will be available for comment by the June Infrastructure Working Group meeting. So what can we expect from today's workshop? So today you'll be hearing from experts in circular economy and in infrastructure, identify synergies between the two sectors and how this opportunity can be implemented. First on the agenda is a fireside chat between myself and Andrew Morley, is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a very prominent organization on the circular economy that has been developing and promoting the concept of circular economy since its launch in 2010. And later on, we're also very fortunate to have an impressive panel from the public and private sector, as well as academic experts. We actually have two panels. And to make the workshop more engaging and interactive, as we heard from your feedback from the last workshop we organized, this time we're going to be using the Slido app, So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome the CEO of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Andrew Morley, and commence the fireside chat. So Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's start. Really the first question that I have for you, Andrew, today is really what we want to first establish is why we're here all today talking about the circular economy. And Andrew, can you tell us what the compelling case is for circular economy and in the context of our audience today and how this crosses over with Finance Ministry's agenda?
Yes, thank you. I think firstly, the general case for a circular economy is compelling. And we've seen over the last 10 years, last 5 to 10 years in particular, a huge amount of research and analysis coming out that really supports the notion of a circular economy, the value it brings, it releases in terms of capturing materials and keeping them in the economy, but also keeping them out of the environment and recognizing the societal benefits that represents. And really, the circular economy is a framework for economic solutions and growth opportunities. And that in and of itself is attractive, but beyond that, by implementing circular economy solutions, you not only release or capture that value, but you also present benefits that are really important against pressing global challenges, whether that's climate change or whether it's biodiversity and many others. So I think that, the case is strong. We're seeing that an enormous number of organizations, private organizations and governments around the world are adopting this thinking and starting to include it into their policies and roadmaps, as Lawrence mentioned earlier, in Italy and many other countries. It's a recognized idea that really talks about systems and the way in which we can, through adopting these solutions, eliminate waste and pollution by design up front, keep the materials and products in use longer, and really capture the invested value of those assets for longer. So, the return on real assets is achieved for longer, and the return on invested energy is achieved for longer by keeping them in use. And really the third principle that we promote very strongly is the notion of innovation for industry to be regenerating natural systems as a byproduct of their activities. So, we talk about those three principles: eliminating waste and pollution by design, keeping materials and products in use, and regenerating natural systems. And I think that, the fact that we have seen an enormous take-up of this idea from industry around the world, we have in our network alone at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, 2,200 organizations that we're actively working with around the world. These are businesses that appreciate that there is value to be had by this approach. There are solutions to innovate towards that their customers want, and there are the benefits, as I mentioned, the side benefits that address their attempts and objectives in reducing their climate footprint to achieving net zero and to achieving other SDGs. So that's another evidence point. I think the extent of take-up of this idea has really been quite phenomenal over the last 10 years. And I think, further to that, the extent to which the finance sector itself is moving into this space is another evidence point. We're seeing really a tremendous sort of a mobilization of finance against the circular economy. For example, over the last several years, from January 2020 to today, we've seen a shift in the assets under management to the point where we have almost 7 billion under management for private funds that are oriented towards circular economy solutions. And we're also seeing, the growth of corporate and sovereign bonds and banking bonds in this space as well over a similar period. We're seeing, companies issuing their private bonds. We're seeing development banks moving into this space and financially funding circular economy projects. So, you know, the movement in the finance sector is really significant as well, which I would argue is another very strong evidence point that we're moving towards this space really quite quickly, because the idea is catching on at a pace that is really very significant. So I think there's a number of evidence points that really point to the idea being an idea that is taking off.
Yeah, very interesting. And reflecting on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's success and impact from various initiatives, and you've done a lot of work on plastics, for example. Yeah. What was the key trigger for change, and what convinced everyone that change was needed?
Well, you know, the plastics case was, for us, is really interesting because we got into this topic in 2003 when we were looking for illustrative material flows that we could model globally. And we looked at plastics because it was it is an incredibly high volume, low value material. It is pervasive globally. Every person on the planet pretty much touches plastic on a daily basis. So we felt it was a really interesting space to do research on. And we, first of all, we pulled together a consortia of actors from across the value chain, which hadn't been done before. So that meant we had the polymer manufacturers, the brands, the packaging manufacturers, the brands who are working to package their products, the cities, the collection agencies, the recycling agencies. We brought them all together and we said, let's look at the stocks and flows of plastics globally and really try to understand what the opportunity space might be. We did that, and we also partnered with the World Economic Forum to provide a platform for us to actually take this research out to the world. We did the analysis that we did in conjunction with industry. We worked very closely with them. We came up with a report that included a lot of detailed analysis of the problem, but also set a vision for the solution space and talked about the nature of and the different approach we needed to create this system that worked. And we also did analysis that looked at the forward accumulative persistent pollution that was being a result of the byproduct of the linear economy. And we used the headline of more plastics in the ocean and fish by 2050 with the report release, which got more media coverage than any report ever released at the World Economic before. And it basically captured the imagination of the public globally and has become a very symbolic quote now of the problem. So the combination of those things we think were important. And in addressing these type of systemic problems, we need to actually orchestrate across many things, and there are many levers that we have to stimulate together. So that's what we did. We orchestrated that type of approach.
And that's fascinating. And so we state in the thought piece that we shared actually with the Infrastructure Working Group of the G20s that the pathways to a circular economy will vary according to economic and demographic factors. And I'm interested to hear from you, how would you describe the opportunities across both developed but also more emerging markets?
Well, I think this is a really important question. And what's really attractive with the idea of the circular economy is that it is a framework for system solutions. It's based on the three principles that I mentioned before that are globally relevant and can be applied in different contexts according to that context. So it's a universal idea that is equally relevant for developed markets with strong, well-established infrastructure as much as developing markets that have more limited infrastructure, particularly when we think about waste infrastructure as an example. But to bring it back to the infrastructure topic specifically in developed and developing markets, this is, it's a topic that's relevant for the creation of new infrastructure, how we think about the materials that are used in the infrastructure, the way the infrastructure is designed, particularly as we think about the built environment and real estate. Can we actually encourage the use of component parts? Can we encourage reuse, design for refitting. So we're not actually encouraging a disposable linear type of infrastructure development where we build it, it's used for a very short period of time, then it's totally scrapped and wasted. That's a massive loss of materials and embedded energy. So it's important for the infrastructure story in that way. But if you also think about the enabling infrastructure, the infrastructure that we need to put in place for collection of waste post-use to be able to recycle those materials, that infrastructure, the way in which we feed those raw materials back into the value chain, that will be different in different contexts, developing markets, but the principles remain the same, and the idea is sound. I think it's really important that you know, when we look at the take-up of this idea, we're seeing it taken up in countries around the world. The plastics example, we work with plastics packs in many different countries with many different contexts and setups, whether it's India or whether it's Africa, whether it's Latin America or Europe, North America, China, Asia Pacific, the islands, Pacific Islands. All of these have very different contexts, but the principles all remain valid, and the opportunity to innovate appropriately within that framework is what's really interesting about this idea.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. And if I may summarize quickly also the key insight that I think you shared with us is that really that circular economy is a framework for economic and growth solution. It has really the power to leverage private sector demand to finance initiative related to sustainability, which is actually really important in the light of the current fiscal constraint. I think that's a particularly strong message for our audience today. And then that it's obviously a journey, and that we are obviously currently at the beginning still of the journey, despite there is a lot of efforts from all players, including, of course, your leadership in that space for the last 10 years or more. But obviously the first step is really about awareness, right? And evidence for change using data. And I think that's really also probably where we are at today still. But I think it's definitely, as you said, it's picking up, right? There is definitely strong sign that the financial markets are picking up. So we're really getting it at the time where things will get at scale, probably fairly quickly. And also that it is actually an opportunity for all countries in the world, and they might have different circumstances, but there is obviously this compelling case to enable more cost-efficient infrastructure for the circularity. So that was really fascinating, Andrew. Really wanted to thank you very much for your participation. And we're going to get into the next part of our workshop today, which will be with a panel. So I would like to introduce Henry Blass. Some of you know him already. He's the Chief Content Officer of the Global Infrastructure Hub, and he will be hosting today's panel session. So Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie, and I'm very delighted to moderate this panel session, setting the scene on why infrastructure is important as part of the circular economy. So before we get started, I'll just briefly introduce our esteemed panel. So first one, Vivek Pathak is the Director and Global Head for Climate Business for the IFC, the International Finance Corporation. And prior to the current appointment, he was the Regional Director for East Asia and the Pacific at IFC. Leading advisory and investment operations across 18 countries. And earlier, he was the Global Head and Director for Investment and Credit Risk. So welcome, Vivek. Second, we have Dr. Chong Kun Hin. She's the Chair of Singapore Center for Livable Cities, an organization dedicated to sustainable and livable cities. Previously, Dr. Chong was the CEO of the Housing and Development Board and the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore, where she helped to steer efforts to transform Singapore into a global city through long-term and comprehensive planning. And we'll get back to that in the panel. And third, we have Dr. Heinz Schendel, is the circular economy expert at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, also known as CSIRO in Australia. Dr. Schendel is a member of the United Nations Environment Programme International Resource Panel, and an expert group for the regional 3R Forum for Asia and the Pacific. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for your time today. So I'm going to start with Dr. Heinz Schendel from CSIRO. So you've been, obviously in your career, you've been looking extensively at future projections related to material uses and climate in general. And Andrew earlier today sort of mentioned how important data and sort of those projections were in order to sort of create awareness. Talking about the more fishes, more plastic in the ocean than fishes by 2050. So is there such evidence out there, or could you tell us what the data says in terms of the drivers and potential impact that the circular economy can have globally, and especially when it comes to infrastructure?
Sure, thanks, and great to be here with you online virtually today. So we know a lot about materials today. From the work of the International Resource Panel. At the moment, globally, we are consuming 90 billion tons of materials. And in fact, there hasn't been a year since 1970, not a single year where material demand has declined. Materials are also very unevenly distributed across the different income groups and countries. And the footprint indicator, a demand-based indicator, shows us that there is no level of wealth yet in any country where material demand has actually started to stabilize or to decline. We also do know, and Andrew has mentioned that there come significant environmental impacts with material use. We can relate all the environmental impacts that we see today, climate change, biodiversity loss. We can relate it to the way how we organize material supply chains. And we do know from studies from the OECD and the International Resource Panel that we are on path to about 170 to 190 billion tons of materials in the global economy by 2060. And this is foreshadowing a commensurate growth in environmental impacts and severe negative economic implications that we get, for example, from the impacts of climate change. Now, as you all know, in the working group, infrastructure plays a crucial role. First of all, 50% of all the materials that we use are for infrastructure. Buildings, roads, bridges, pipelines, poles require 50% of all materials globally. There's also a very large future infrastructure need in order to satisfy the 2030 development agenda, the electrification, water and sewerage, sanitation, and living standards more generally in the global south. In fact, our research shows that 70% of the infrastructure that is going to be needed in 2050 in the global south is yet to be built. This is at the same time a challenge and a very large opportunity. The material characteristics of the infrastructure, the quality, the longevity of infrastructure will determine the operational performance, but also the amount of resources that are required to fuel and to maintain the infrastructure. We've heard before there are several aspects to infrastructure in the circular economy. We need to get the infrastructure itself circular. So building materials need to be reused end of life of buildings. We need to invest in our circularity infrastructure, the waste management and resource recovery systems. But more generally, we also want to build infrastructure that provides services in a different way. You can replace a lot of traffic, for example, by a better digital infrastructure. Or you can invest in public transport, which relieves the need for private transport. We also know from the modeling work of the IRP done for the G7 that there are many economically attractive options for circularity and for resource efficiency, not just in the infrastructure domain, but more generally. And we do know that in the medium and in the long term, investing in circularity is actually the better economic strategy. Creating a circular economy will not initially mean that we're not needing any additional materials, that the material demand is not continue to grow. But what the circular economy can do already now is to take 30% of resource demand, so the top of resource demand off, which will save a lot of cost, both economic, environmental cost, and social cost. Infrastructure plays also an important role for climate change. And again, the work of the International Resource Panel has shown that the gains that you get from a resource-efficient circular economy that minimizes waste flows can help you to pay for your climate action, which I think is actually really an important aspect. To achieve the changes that we need in infrastructure, we also need to achieve changes in the way how we train and reskill our workforce. The circular economy will need different skills, will depend on new forms of vocational training, require new forms of knowledge sharing. Not everything will be achieved through changes in curricula. Finally, I think it's important that we continue to create the knowledge base, the metrics, the data and indicators that present us with the real opportunities in the circular economy. How much employment, how much value adding, how much reduction of environmental impacts can we actually achieve? Recently, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has quantified the circular economy as a 7.7 trillion business. But we really need to continue to grow our information on the volumes, the values, and the impacts. We do know that resource recovery in the short term is economically beneficial. But I think when you look at what we can achieve in the G20 in terms of planning for closed loop urban and industrial systems, then you can see the potential, the magnitude of economic benefit that we can unlock.
Thank you. That was very insightful, and obviously, I mean, you're sort of summarizing that the impact infrastructure has, I guess, on the material, but also the potential for circular economy and sort of solving some of the challenges that we have, including climate. That's very important. I'm just going to move now to Dr. Chong, and so looking at it from, we're talking about solutions. And obviously, throughout your career, you've led the planning and development of entire new districts in Singapore, with a very strong emphasis on long-term and integrated planning. So maybe moving a little bit away from linear, as we were saying initially. So how can this long-term vision for the built environment help achieve transformative outcome for circularity? And what are some of the examples and initiatives that have demonstrated success and impact in Singapore?
Thank you, Henry, and hello to everyone. Well, first, as an introduction, Singapore is actually a very small city-state. We are very highly land and resource constrained. So our vision, nevertheless, is to make ourselves a livable city. And actually, sustainability is critical for our survival. It's not just a nice to have. And in fact, in the area of climate change, we've already set out some goals and committed to capping our carbon dioxide equivalent emissions at 65 million tons by 2030. We'll try to halve that by 2050 and eventually achieve net zero emissions by the second half of the century. But how to achieve all these very ambitious goals that we have? Well, usually what we would do is to start with very long-term comprehensive plans from a national level. And we have formulated plans like the Singapore Sustainability Blueprint and the latest, the Singapore Green Plan 2030. Why have these plans? Well, basically, they set out the key goals and strategies, and the idea is to rally collective action by all stakeholders, including the private sector and the community, and not just the government. And key to these plans is really the way we develop very large-scale infrastructure. We try to be guided by the principles of a circular economy, and as mentioned, where resources can be efficiently used, reused, recycled, upcycled, and we try to minimize waste in our goal to become a zero-waste nation. And we want to develop greener infrastructure and buildings. So let me just share two examples of infrastructure development where we adopted a combination of policy, regulation, and technology to achieve our goals. And in fact, these are two examples that is reference to what Heinz have just said. So let me touch on the first one. It's on waste management. Well, we have developed a zero waste master plan, and really this charts out how we adopt a circular economy approach to sustainable waste and resource management. So we aim to increase our recycling rate from about 60% to 70% by 2030 to reduce the amount of waste sent to, we only have one landfill. So we really have to reduce our waste. And how do we do this? Well, we target waste streams which are on construction, food, packaging, and e-waste. And we have legislated, in fact, an act to manage these waste streams. So how do we reduce our waste? Well, we do it through incineration. And in fact, we have developed 6 waste to energy plants that reduce waste to ash through incineration. And this enables extensive space savings at Singapore's only landfill. And now we hope to recover the incineration bottom ash as a new construction material. And of course, such waste to energy plants recover energy from the waste incineration process. But we want to take this one step further, and we have co-located our new Tuas water reclamation plant. In fact, in Singapore, we recycle all used water, and we are going to co-locate with the integrated waste facility to maximize both energy and resource recovery in solid waste and used water treatment. The plant will complete in 2027 and save more than 200,000 tons of carbon emissions annually. The second example is about managing construction activities. We try to achieve greater sustainability through the life cycle of construction activities, from design to implementation to recycling demolition material, and to influence greater sustainability upstream in the design, development, and maintenance of properties. Our Building and Construction Authority's Green Mark scheme is really a voluntary certification program that evaluates a building on its environmental impact and performance. And actually today, more than 40% of all buildings in Singapore have been certified green under this scheme. Now then, at the design and construction stage, the build professionals are really encouraged to adopt productive construction methods such as prefabrication and modular forms of construction. I've built hundreds and thousands of flats, and we've used these methods. And design guidelines also encourage the prioritization of materials that are responsibly sourced. For example, the upcycling of the incinerator bottom ash that I talk about could be recycled as sand replacement in concrete. And we want to encourage renewable materials like mass engineered timber to try to keep the resource loop closed. And we've been nudging the industry to fully leverage innovative technologies, such as those that really enable the incorporation of recyclable structures by adopting the design for disassembly methods. And at the end of the building cycle, life cycle, we want to maximize the resource recovery of demolition materials for beneficial reuse and recycling. And in fact, in Singapore, companies follow a demolition protocol to maximize waste recovery through audits and waste management plans. So recycled concrete aggregates, which is really made from the demolition material, is reclaimed, and they can be used in cement for non-structural applications or as a sub-base layer in roads. And in 2019, 99% of the 1.4 million tons of demolition waste generated was actually successfully recycled in Singapore. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Very impressive numbers. 99% of the construction waste being recycled. I think that's a great target, and great to see they can be achieved in Singapore. So thanks for those insights. Now I'm going to turn to Vivek Pathak. I mean, Andrew earlier sort of, and I think we're all aware of the importance of the emerging markets in the transition. I mean, a lot of the infrastructure hasn't been built yet in those places. So you have a long experience of developing and structuring projects in those markets and working with the private sector. So how from your experience, are developing economies advancing circular economy practices, and maybe also how is the IFC supporting transition to such an economy?
Well, thanks so much, Henri, and a very good morning or a very good afternoon or evening to all of you all. Thanks for having me here. So, you know, interestingly enough, if you look at developing countries, they have in many ways been practicing different parts, concepts of a circular economy for a long time. Growing up in India, I still recall where, you know, there'd be somebody who'd be coming to collect old newspapers, old bottles, old cans to recycle. This was all a part of the informal economy in most of these countries. And unfortunately, as these countries have become global centers of production, I don't think their, the circularity part of it has increased, commensurated in terms of the scale at which they needed to go up there. So on the one hand, I think as these countries have become large producers, exporters, and consumers, this puts them in a strong position to embed circularity principles in their industrial growth and development strategies. On the other hand, it's taking time because there is the informal sector that's doing some of it. And the challenge that I think developing countries are facing is how do they either formalize this, because you don't want to destroy the informal sector because they are creating jobs there, or how do you make the informal sector more palatable and introduce certain standards there? The thing that most countries have recognized, and I think they're moving pretty quickly, that they cannot continue. The business as usual sort of thing cannot continue anymore. They realize that landfills are getting sort of out of control. Land is getting scarce in most countries. They realize that it's polluting the groundwater in many cases, polluting the soil. And if you're coastal, if you're a country by the sea, you're actually seeing the impact where how all the plastic waste is going in and even destroying tourism sites, for example. So we are working very closely with our colleagues at the World Bank, and in ASEAN, we have a great program going where we're working jointly, where the bank is doing a lot of analytical work. Then we engage with governments and see what sort of reform is needed, because you will require some amount of reform. Dr. Chong talked about the real estate sector. So for example, any new real estate development, I would argue, should have circularity embedded. Very simple thing like make sure you segregate your trash. You keep your plastic separately, your recyclables separately. So, simple things like that, which are a challenge because a large part of the real estate in developing countries hasn't done that already. So that is one thing that we are really keen to push. And whenever we finance real estate development, we hope to make it green through our EDGE tool, but also insist upon some of these things to make sure that you are taking care of this challenge at the source and not at the end. You don't want rag pickers going into trash dumps, segregating it there. So circularity for us is a key theme which traverses multiple sectors. And it builds upon our initiatives in the area of resource management, sustainability to reduce footprints, and very importantly, how do you close material groups? And ultimately, we're hoping all that can sort of go drive the green growth agenda in emerging markets. So we are engaged in a number of sectors. Typically, circularity is looked at in manufacturing, and there we've got some great examples of working with companies. We recently financed the Indorama Group, which is a large producer of plastic bottles and PET, to help them ultimately touch a goal of recycling about 50 million tons of plastic every year. Similarly, in the electronic waste is becoming a huge issue now. We financed companies in China and India, which are helping recycle phones. We financed a company in called Alba, which is a German company out of Hong Kong, which is doing a lot of great work across Asia. But they've got this great project in Hong Kong where they actually recycle white goods. Now, for things like that to happen, the government has to play a key role. The solutions are definitely there from the private sector, but this is one area where I think collaborating with governments is going to be critical. We need to get governments to understand that they need to embed circularity in a number of sectors, and a lot of reform is needed. Sometimes we will require to give them incentives for companies and people to behave correctly. So, it's important that we try and set up the right infrastructure for waste collection. Now, the challenge in this is that unlike renewable energy, where we have a model that works, what would you call scaling solar, and then we just go and replicate it across different emerging markets. Unfortunately, in circularity, it's not that straightforward because there are local nuances, there are local habits, there are behavioral issues. So we may need to adapt models across the globe to make sure that this can be implemented. I'll just share with you a very interesting example that I came across yesterday. I was on a panel judging young entrepreneurs, and one of them from Nigeria actually came up with a solution that people will get insurance if they can sort of collect and deliver X amount of waste. So if you deliver X kilos of plastic, we will give you 1 month of free insurance. So that is encouraging people, changing their habits and encouraging them to change behavior to ensure that that sort of their trash is then segregated and can be recycled. So I think, transforming waste and recycling goods is going to be, that can be easily reused, refurbished, or recycled, and return to the loop is going to be critical. And the question really is, how do we make people aware? Public education is important. You need institutional capacity. And even if materials are redesigned so that they can be more circular and waste is designed out, the infrastructure needs to be there. So I keep emphasizing infrastructure because that is going to be critical. Now, beyond just the manufacturing sector, which is probably the biggest challenge, I think this touches upon almost anything and everything. Real estate, like I said earlier, definitely the whole tourism space, agriculture, coming up with ways that you can recycle some of your agricultural produce. So we did a very interesting investment a few months ago with a company called Appeal. And that in some ways is actually circular, because what Appeal has done is it's developed an organic solution by which they then coat fruits and vegetables so they don't rot. It increases their shelf life by almost 2 to 3 weeks. So things like that are going to be adding to the circularity. So that's one. The other thing is, how do you work with cities and governments and municipalities at an early stage when it comes to managing waste, and especially landfills? And another part of circularity, I would argue, is using some of this waste and converting it into energy, so waste to energy. So we have done something very interesting in the city of Belgrade, where we're trying to implement this. So these are some examples, and I think the good news is that I think the call to action is being heard very clearly. Cities are realizing what needs to be done. Countries have definitely realized that. The private sector has recognized that. I think we need to continue pushing and also start to change behavior, because I think circularity can be achieved at an industrial scale. Certainly, you can influence the private sector, you can have policies in place, but I think each one of us has to also change our behavior. Simple things like, how do you dispose of your trash? And I keep coming back to that because that's a huge issue in most of the countries where we work here. So these are some of the things. We've got some very interesting initiatives that we're working on. And I think clearly there is potential. And the good news is that all this makes money at the end of the day. So for my friends from the private sector who want to know what's my return on capital going to be, I think there are proven business models across the world where if you do the right thing, it's a profitable business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivek. So great insight, especially I think on the innovation that's sort of popping up here and there, and the awareness as well across the emerging markets. So if I'd like to come back maybe a little bit to the role of governments, being conscious that most of the audience today is on the government side. So we've heard about those innovation, the policy, the awareness angle, and so when we consider those, I like to get, I think, or two other speakers to maybe take 1 minute. I mean, the panel is coming slowly to an end. 1 or 2 minutes, just maybe to highlight one innovation that they think is really sort of critical, sort of had a lot of impact, and sort of maybe articulate what are sort of the key roles for governments. I mean, again, we've heard about awareness, policies, incentives, etc. I think be keen to hear some ideas on this one. But yeah, 1 or 2 minutes maximum if you can. I'll start with you, Dr. Chong.
Thank you, Henry. Well, I think governments play a very important role, especially from the public sector. And I think there are a couple of things governments can do. Firstly is to actually encourage technological innovation. So for example, in Singapore, we set aside something like $19 billion in the next 5 years just to look at support research, innovation, and enterprise. And some funds are earmarked for urban solutions and sustainability research. So that's number one. Giving funding, support R&D. Secondly is actually governments can help build economies of scale. And in Singapore, the government invests in many sustainable infrastructure initiatives. So I myself built new towns. So what we've done is we've invested, for example, in new technologies in new towns. You may have 100,000 dwelling units. And what we've done is we have fitted them out with green features and smart technology to trial and to pilot. So these could be very large scale pneumatic waste, charging stations for electric vehicles, renewable energy, smart parking, etc. I have no time to go into that. I think another role that government can play really is in aggregating demand for renewable energy to lower the barriers to deployment. And this is what happened because solar energy took a long time to take off. But what we did was we tried to become the critical mass. So for example, the Economic Development Board and the Housing Development Board, we got together and launched what we call the Solar Nova program. Basically, it aggregated the demand for solar PV systems across all government agencies to achieve economies of scale. And as a result, the price of solar came down and everybody benefited, including the private sector. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Pass it on to Heinz.
Yeah. So, you know, business certainty is one thing that government can provide. But I think what the speaker before me just has talked about is the very key role government can play as an enabler in the innovation system, especially for investments that are very large, uncertain, have a long time to lead to a return. That's really where government plays a role as a procurer. And that's especially important for infrastructure. Obviously, very often we have to do with very large investments, big projects in transport, for example. I'd like to talk for a moment about cities, which from my point of view are the ideal ecosystem for circular economy. And if we could close the loop in cities, we would make a big leap forward in terms of achieving circularity. Yet in many countries, there is a bit of a gap between national policy initiatives and what happens on the ground in urban agglomerations. And I'd like to bring to the attention of delegates an example from Australia. And the example is that of the city deals. The Australian government has started to develop city deals for specific cities and not just focusing on the big cities, but especially the second-tier cities. And these are partnerships where the three levels of government come together with the community and they look after initiatives that increase the livability and the environmental outcomes, both in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, but also circularity and sustainable material management in cities. And I think that's a really worthwhile attempt to create solutions where the national government and the local level and the city authorities can work together, and maybe something that we can replicate in other domains.
Thank you so much. So I think if we summarize, there's obviously a lot of opportunities here. I think Vivek talked quite a bit about sort of policies, enabling policies that can be done. Dr. Chong about scaling, aggregating demand, and also the role of government to basically help, at least in the initial phase, the innovation space. And I think Heinz, what you just talked about, so the innovation, supporting the innovation, but including at the city and community level, that's also kind of one of the angle that government can act on. So thanks so much for those insights. And I think for the audience, you'll have a chance to basically ask more questions to audience. We're doing it, as we say initially, in a very democratic way. So you can actually vote for your favorite questions on Slido. I think we're going to put the code is in the chat. Please feel free to vote for this question, and then we'll come back at the end of panel 2 with the top questions, and the speakers will come back. So this is not the last time you'll have a chance to talk to this great panel. But thanks so much. So to bring us to an end of this panel session, very warm thank you to all of the panelists, obviously. I'd like now to introduce Joe Da Silva, who is the Development Director at Arup, and Joe will be moderating our next panel session. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Henry. And good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. Arup has been collaborating with the GI Hub on the thought piece Marie referred to previously, and also working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for the past 5 years, exploring how we put the principles of circular economy into practice. As a leading global infrastructure firm, we very much see that the transition to a circular economy is essential to addressing the climate and biodiversity crises, but it's also a significant business opportunity and a job creation opportunity. As infrastructure is so resource intensive, it plays a very critical role in this transition. And we believe it's going to very fundamentally affect the way in which infrastructure is planned, designed, constructed, and importantly, procured. And as Vivek has noted, this is particularly important in emerging economies, where most new infrastructure will be built over the next decade. And there's the opportunity to build in circular from the outset. I think the starting point is worth noting. I mean, the construction industry lags most other industries in terms of efficiency and innovation. And currently over 90% of materials used in construction ends up in landfill. And the sort of paradigm is to demolish and rebuild rather than extend design life and consider the end of life of infrastructure. And as Dr. Cheong Keung Hyang has said, it is possible to do things differently, and they're doing that in Singapore. So I'm very delighted to have with me here a panel today to expand on this and to provide some examples of both what is happening already and what more is needed from governments in the realms of sort of policy, technology, and finance, which are really the enablers to fuel innovation and create this transition. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Jonas Bystrom, who is a circular economy expert at the European Investment Bank. Jonas's role is focused on project appraisal and monitoring and sector-related work in the circular economy, waste management, and going right the way through to clean oceans. And his experience encompasses work in 50 countries. Secondly, Nicholas Svechin, who is head of the infrastructure markets at Lafarge Holcim, which is the world leader in construction materials, developing advanced and sustainable solutions for road transport and natural resource markets. And finally, Philippe Crete, who is head of the Circular Economy Fund at Fondation, which is a Canadian pension fund committed to sustainable development. And Philippe has previously worked at the UN as an advisor in climate finance and natural resources, as well as in the private sector on carbon offset projects and transactions. So welcome to all three of you. Jonas, perhaps I can begin with you. From our perspective, Europe seems to be leading in the world on the circular economy at present. Could you give us some insight into the sort of the policies that are facilitating this and what you see as the implications for the future of infrastructure?
Thank you very much, Joe, and it's great to be here in this very worthwhile and interesting workshop. And I will start by kind of giving a bit of a picture of how I think that the future infrastructure and the future cities will look if we manage things correctly. And I think the reason for that is, like we've heard from quite a few of the previous speakers, there will be massive infrastructure investments that will have to be made to meet future demand, in particular in developing countries. And to deliver on this in both an effective and a resource-efficient manner, it will require a circular approach. And this will bring some quite distinct features to future cities. And a first important point, I think, and I hope, is that all infrastructure will meet real needs, and it can be adapted to changing future conditions. And I think the last year with COVID and climate impacts around the world really demonstrate the relevance and importance of this. And it points at the need to future-proof and to design for resilience. And then I think that more than today, we will rely on refurbished and repurposed infrastructure, which will have much lower material and climate footprints than new build. And there are some good examples of that around the world. The Tate Modern Gallery in London is housed in an old power station, and Enel in Italy is currently looking at repurposing 23 power plants into something different in a circular manner. And they have examples of theme park, logistics hub, tourist village that would take over these places. New infrastructure would include large shares of recycled or renewable materials. And there would be a high degree of sharing in buildings, which is facilitated by the design for modularity and flexibility, which also would, like someone earlier said, enable disassembly and reuse rather than just demolition and disposal. And this increased sharing would free up space in cities and enable the introduction of nature-based solutions, urban greenery, urban wetlands, farms on rooftops, etc., that would increase resilience, but also regulate temperature, clean the air, and increase or improve the ambience in the cities. So that's the future. And the question is, how do we achieve it? I think that commitment and collaboration by all relevant stakeholders is needed, but also, like said in the previous panel, guidance and support from various levels of government. Like you said, Joe, in EU and Europe, a lot of initiatives already have been made and taken. And in the Circular Economy Action Plan presented last year, the Commission identified construction and buildings as one of the priority sectors for good reasons, as we heard today. And another example is levels, the European approach and system for measuring the sustainability performance of buildings, which include a number of indicators that would contribute to circular thinking and planning. The Commission is also working on a strategy for sustainable built environment that will promote circularity principle throughout the life cycle of buildings. Like Heinz said in the previous panel, cities will have a very important role in this, and they can lead by circular example. They can offer circular asset, circular services, etc. They can also take on the circular procurement opportunity, where, for example, Amsterdam, a leading circular city in the EU, have committed in their circular strategy that already by 2023, they would make all the invitations to tender in the built environment circular. So a very high and good ambition there. Finally, stakeholder collaboration. A good example of that is the major infrastructure resource optimization group in the UK. Many different infrastructure operators, and this group since 2013 enabled them to discuss, compare notes, but also to find ways to collaborate on projects, exchange materials, etc. Then, representing a bank, of course, I will focus a bit on financing, which will play a very important role in this transition. And banks can commit to support it. EIB, for example, we have, as the EU and Climate Bank, committed to dedicate 50% of our financing to climate action and to environmental sustainability. And circular infrastructure fits very well inside those parameters. And that is a target for 2025. And in the last 5 years, we have committed or financed around 2.7 billion towards circular economy projects, a bit more than 100 projects in 7 different sectors. So it's quite a wide range. But we are, as the climate, as the EU Bank, looking for ways to do more. And one example of that is a bit of the collaboration referred to before. We are working with the 5 largest national promotional banks in the EU in something called the Joint Initiative on Circular Economy, looking for ways to cooperate and ensure that together we can maybe do more than we do individually. And there we have a 10 million financing target. So I think in summary, that is what we are doing, what I hope we will do, and what I hope we will achieve in the future. Thank you.
Jonas, thank you very much. I'd like to now go to Nicolas, who is, at the other end of the spectrum, dealing in the realm of construction materials. Nicolas, could you give a flavour of the innovation that is going on in construction materials in order to transition to this circular economy? And what do you see as the key innovations that are coming up in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Joe. Thank you all for attending. So let me start by sharing a figure with you. 15 billion tons, 20 billion tons. That's the total amount of construction materials we use for infrastructure projects in the world. Just to illustrate, this is 3,000 times per year the equivalent tonnage of the pyramid of Gizeh, the biggest pyramid in Egypt, just to set up the scene. So everything we do about construction material has a huge impact on circularity and on sustainability at large. And I have maybe two good news to share with you. The first news is that we have solution, and I will come to it in a minute, and to take on the very inspiring introduction of the CEO of the MacArthur Foundation. We have solution to decrease waste. We have solution to improve recyclability of materials, and we have solution and ideas on innovations. We are not the only ones, but we are working heavily on it. And the second good news I'd like to share is that these are often solutions that are cheaper than traditional method. And I think to the audience, this could be fairly interesting to note. Let me illustrate with two first illustration. First, waste. We are recycling millions of tons of waste already into concrete. Concrete to make bridges, concrete to make dams, concrete to make the foundation of your windmills in all G20 countries. In our company, for example, we are recycling already 46 million tons per year of waste of all kinds in our concrete, in our materials at large. And we want to do more. We want to double it by 2030, roughly. And to take on one remark that was made by Mr. Patek from the IFC, one of the key topics for us is to have a stable collection of waste. We need more waste for our industry. So one thing public bodies can help in very strongly is to help us to collect more waste. Second illustration, Dr. Schandl was pointing out on the importance of roads, and I would like to insist a little bit maybe on the roads. Roads are absorbing more than half of all construction material of infrastructure, and in fact, we are all driving on roads. We see the black part, we see the white part of it, but in fact, below that, you have a lot of layers, meters of gravel, sand, stones, and all this kind of stuff. I will not detail here, and these are absorbing a lot of materials, and we can use a lot of recycled materials. There are many sources. Could be demolition waste from buildings, could be excavated waste, excavated materials when you dig in tunnels, or if you do, for example, a metro like we do underground in Paris. And here, the big challenge is to increase this proportion. Today, roughly in the world, we consider we're at about 5% overall. In Europe, it's about 20% recycled aggregates. We've seen in Singapore, probably it's over 50% already. So we have the technique, but the problem is to connect the dots. The problem is to organize, and I like very much in the first panel, many people say you have to be upfront, you have to be at the conception stage. And one message I have to you is, please involve the construction material industry upfront. This is a very local domain. We need to be more upfront, and that's one of the issues we need to tackle. And I think the public bodies have a great role to play in shaping these alliances, shaping this ecosystem, so that the construction material people and industry can act upfront at the design stage of the project. Last but not least, Joe, to your question on innovation. So like in every domain, I would say digital can help. And can help really in connecting, typically in connecting the dots. And we can improve a lot in construction industry. We are not that much digitalized, so we can do much better, all of us. And here I'd like to flag one platform called ORIS. It's a digital neutral platform that basically compares all road design from a construction material perspective. So typically you can say for a given budget with my road, I want to improve circularity, and you get the best type of design to improve the construction material circularity. And I'm happy to say that this ORIS platform, digital neutral platform, has been selected by the Global Infrastructure Hub as one of the top 20 initiatives of the year in terms of technology. So we are very proud of it. And so you can look at the Global Hub website, and you will see a great video about it. So I have really two messages for you. We have solution. And second, get us at the design stage upfront in the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's great to have some good news. And I think there's a lot of very exciting things going on. It's a question about how we scale, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But first, I wanted to bring Philippe into the conversation as someone who is an investor in infrastructure. Philippe, could you share with us your thoughts on how investors can stimulate innovation for the circular economy, and how governments can support this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joe, and thanks all for participating. And I think I'd like to echo what Andrew mentioned at the beginning, and also what Jonas said about how financial institutions can indeed step up to stimulate circular economy, which is what Fonds d'Action has done over the last few years. And increasingly, as you know, we're seeing financial institutions actively seeking not only to not create or generate negative environmental or social impacts, but also to seek to achieve specific environmental impacts, such as greater circularity in companies. And last year alone, ESG assets under management reached an incredible amount of $40 trillion US, and impact investing, a subset of that, reached $715 billion US, and those market trends keep increasing. And when we decided to start investing in circular economy, we started doing so by investing in a few, private equity deals and companies we felt were innovative to transform the market that we operated in, and it's mainly the province of Quebec in Canada. But also because we felt it achieved the various objectives of our investment thesis. First, we wanted to send a price signal on circularity by starting to invest in companies that increase circularity in their subsectors. And we wanted to reach different objectives. So Fonds d'Action is committed to invest roughly 50% of its asset into three investment thematics: the fight of climate change and the protection of biodiversity, sustainable agri-food, and promoting sustainable cities and livelihoods. So circularity hit positive impacts for all three sectors that we want to keep investing in. And we also felt that we could even stimulate more innovation by focusing on younger companies that invest a lot in R&D, which is what we did by recently launching a new VC circular economy fund of $30 million Canadian. And we did that by looking at different environmental impacts that we felt financial institutions such as ours could tackle. In many areas of North America, there's a fairly poor recycling rate, and in the province of Quebec, it's around 50%, and it's been stagnating for a few years. We see very little innovation and investment in sorting facilities and a high rate of contamination, therefore creating a mismatch between demand from larger corporations who are increasingly looking for recyclable products to incorporate into the supply chain, and between the suppliers, which are essentially mostly public-owned supply facilities. And felt that we could really do make a difference by investing in smaller companies that focus a lot on R&D and also seek to reach out to larger companies who are facing environmental products. At the same time, we felt that the market fundamentals were right to start a fund like this. Increasingly, consumers are asking for products and services with lesser environmental impact and are willing to pay a premium for them. And also, governments in Canada and in our province are coming in with ambitious regulation that is forcing innovation, is forcing shifts in supply chains and actors to adapt. And we're seeing this, for instance, with the new regulation kicking in on extended producer responsibility. So, we wanted to address specific environmental problems and felt that market fundamentals were right. So we look at where the financing gaps in the market were. We saw that in early stage private equity, there are a lot of young companies seeking financing to bring innovation to market. And that's what we decided to focus on, but just money alone won't cut it. And we felt we really needed to get partners on board to provide smart money. And by that, we mean teaming up with different levels of governments, experts in the circularity space, and also strategic companies that consume goods and services. And that's what we did with our fund. So essentially, we reach out to the Quebec government and the city of Montreal to come in as partner in the fund. And both have done so. And together we were very proud of what we achieved. Essentially, the Quebec government recycling arm is putting in subsidies to complement what the fund will be doing. So every time we'll be investing in companies, the Quebec government will be providing a certain level of subsidies to the companies. And the city of Montreal, on the other hand, will be providing technical assistance by helping companies do circularity studies, for instance, life cycle analysis, greenhouse gas footprints, and also help companies better reach out to greater market players that can purchase their services or product, and also help them source material. And their involvement in our fund is not created in a vacuum, because we've seen a lot of action from the Canadian government and the Quebec government to either provide a great enabling environment for circularity and through different types of incentives. And we see it with different subsidy programs. For instance, in the province of Quebec, the government is providing different types of subsidies to invest in new technologies and modernize infrastructures of recycling centers. The government has created a certification system for construction material landfills to distinguish leaders from bad players. And the city of Montreal is currently working on new draft procurement policies to increase circularity as criteria to purchase different services and material. And at the same time of providing different incentives, government are acting strong on providing new regulation. Some of you might have heard that the Canadian government plans to propose and enact legislation by the end of the year to ban single plastic use in Canada, which will have obviously major impacts on supply chains and will require innovation and investments coming from institutions such as ours. And more recently, in the province of Quebec, the government has essentially revamped its recycling and deposit law to include all beverages, containers, packaging, newspapers, and prints under an extended producer responsibility principle, whereby companies will be responsible from cradle to grave, essentially, for paying for a recycling system, and also will be imposing them targets to reach in terms of level of recycling and repurposed material. So those are examples of what the financial sectors can do and how governments can help.
Philippe, thank you very much for both the examples from your own organisation, what investors can do generally, but also sort of the regulatory environment in Canada and how that's driving change locally. We've only got a few minutes left. Jonas, you pointed out that one of the most important things to drive change is collaboration. Could I invite you, do you have any thoughts on how multilateral cooperation at the G20 level could make a difference in furthering action to transition to a circular economy more quickly?
Well, I think that with the massive investments, the massive infrastructure delivery we have in front of us, there is a need to learn from what have been done rightly and well in countries who have been at this for a while in other parts of the world. And among the G20, there may also be some exchanges and some learning. So finding fora and finding ways of really transferring the good experience, what shall we do more of, and that which didn't work, what should we really avoid, that I think would be very good. And G20 probably could have a very important role in this. And part of this is also to ensure, like I said, that the right investments are made. I mean, I don't think with all the problems we have with what needs to be done, the impacts of different kinds, we can afford to invest in politically kind of driven vanity type of projects, and try to ensure that we stay focused on really what is needed, looking objectively at the needs and trying to find the best way to meet these needs. It's a very, very good basis. And yeah, G20 could be a good way of building there. Another thing, just to mention, you asked me to look for, to explain the EU approach. There's something called the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency that was launched, I think, a couple of months ago only. And it's the Commission that has got, I think, up to now 12 countries and a couple of international organizations to cooperate. And an organization like that could also get regional circular economy alliances, other stakeholders to start to exchange on a more global level. So good reasons to look for those fora, and then really ensure that good examples are spread and bad examples are kind of looked at and discouraged as well. Thank you.
Jonas, thank you for those comments. I'm afraid that time is short and I'm going to have to draw this panel to a close, but you'll have an opportunity to ask the panelists questions in the next session. So Henry, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks everyone for your contribution on this one. So we're going to move to the Q&A session now. So as promised, we're doing it in a very democratic way, and so it's pretty clear. The first two questions that got the most votes are actually linked to what Joe was asking, which is around the objectives. What is it that we, the G20 as an entity and countries individually could set as targets? And I think for that question, there was two. One was, what should our ambition be with respect to transitioning to a circular economy? What is a realistic goal? And also there's the number of different circular economy metrics. Which one do you think we should focus on? So maybe for this one, I will turn to both, I guess, a government, so Dr. Chong from Singapore, and an MDB, so EIB for this, and kind of ask you, obviously you either kind of manage a country or you manage a huge portfolio of projects. Do you have examples? Do you have ideas of those metrics and what could be a realistic goals, maybe in one of your strategies? So keen to hear. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Chong.
Yeah, I think the goals for each country really depends on your need. For example, I cited the example of waste management. For us, it is so important because we only have one landfill site. So I think we are quite pragmatic. We zoom in on the things that are critical for us. So that's one. So circularity on waste becomes very important. A second one is almost an existential issue. I didn't cite the example because of lack of time, and that is water. For Singapore, water is an existential issue. So very quickly, we have 4 taps. We still need to import some water from our neighbor. But what we have done now is to completely try to close the water loop. Almost every drop of rain that falls on Singapore, we're like a sponge, we have a whole network of drains and reservoirs that capture everything. So we optimize what God has given to us. And the next thing is to actually use water. We try to recover all the water that we use. So used water is recycled. That's why we have reclamation plants. And I mentioned the example of the reclamation plant being located next to the waste to energy plant, because you have water reclamation, but it uses a lot of energy. So we need to close that loop as well. And finally, mainly because we are an island city-state, we have to desalinate some water. So really for us, we pick the goals where we really need, because it's very critical for us. I'll just stop there. Maybe others may have more comments. Thank you.
Those are great insights, and I think your point is well taken, that circularity is actually a solution. So you actually your advice is to start with your problems, and I think we could. Climate obviously at the G20 level is one, and I think the various panelists has highlighted the role that circular economy can play. So in a way, the target may actually stay on the sort of climate side of waste, but then see circularity as a solution. Maybe Jonas, do you have any other metrics than maybe the EIB is using on circularity?
Well, I mean, with regard to metrics and goals, like you asked, the EU have had a very important role in driving the development from just collecting and dumping waste in landfills to now kind of stage where in many countries the recycling levels are very high, and the target now is to have 65% of municipal waste recycled by 2035, and that has really put all the countries, all the stakeholders on a common path on thinking of what can we do collection-wise, treatment-wise, getting the industry players online to kind of contribute to deliver on that. So I think recycling, recovery material, a very important target. Then a country like Netherlands, Amsterdam have set the target to be fully circular by 2050. Also other aspects, material productivity then could be part of the game. But I think, like was said before, it varies between countries. So I think the important thing is to be ambitious, looking at the context, looking at the material streams in the country and in the city, like was said before, and set an ambitious target, and then do everything that is needed, get all the stakeholders involved that could contribute to the targets to start to talk, start to collaborate and see how it could be achieved.
Thank you, Jonas. And I see that, Andrew, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the comments that Jonas just made and reinforce that. I think that's exactly the right approach. It's by country and it's also by sector. I would say that in the plastic space in particular, we established the global commitment with the intent of getting 100% recyclable, compostable or reusable plastics by 2025 of all of the companies that are participating in that commitment. And that set a very ambitious target for that group. And the point that Jonas is making, actually being focused and ambitious to drive real shifts in innovation and actual material flows is the way to do this. Another example would be in Europe at the moment. If you look at fashion as a sector as well, at the moment there's less than 1% of clothing or textiles actually being captured and reinserted into the value chain. Massive waste and massive pollution as a result. And to set an ambitious target by region or by country to shift that 1% to 25 or 1% even to 50 by 2030, for example, and looking at what that might mean for focusing public-private investment on infrastructure for collection and recycling infrastructure would be the way to approach this, by country, by sector, with really ambitious targets.
Thank you. That's great. And before we move to the second batch of questions around procurement, and I'll go to the other speakers on that one. Maybe just finishing on, I guess, data and metrics, Heinz. Is there because I think we hear about the metrics around plastic, etc. Is there still, you feel like some missing metrics there that will actually enable countries to set up sectors to actually set up the targets?
It's a good question. I think we do have all the metrics and analytical tools in place for the physical flows. We could actually improve our ability to do economic accounting for the circular economy. That would be worthwhile. I think what we don't fully capture is how tremendous the transition of the consumption and production process would need to be to actually achieve the type of circularity and decarbonization that we need to stay within planetary boundaries and to achieve the sustainable development goals. So this is a very fundamental transition. Things are going to look very different, and that might at some point require metrics that help us to monitor the transition process. And we don't have those, perhaps.
Thanks so much. And I think the economic aspect of circularity for infrastructure, to your point, is probably one thing that in the roadmap that we're sort of working towards should probably be included, and beyond that, the impact on jobs as well, which I think, to your point, is actually could be positive on the economies. So that was the first batch of questions. I'm sure everyone will had an answer for that one, but maybe I'll move to the second batch of questions that is actually focused on procurement, and there's quite a few that sort of focus on how can circular economy support better OPEX and CAPEX. Do we see opportunities in leveraging circular procurement in the procurement of infrastructure in the construction market? So maybe I'll turn back to Nicolas, because I think you always sort of talked earlier on about the opportunities around procurement.
Yeah, well, I think the key topic seen from my perspective is that we've seen a number of speakers saying that material is a key topic when you talk about circularity in infrastructure. And to cut a long story short, we are often at the end of the line. We are at the end of the value chain. When everything is designed, everything has been designed, conceptualized, engineered, then say, yeah, by the way, we need the material. So basically, in terms of procurement, I think what we may try to jointly change, and we have to be part of this move, is how do we take up the construction material industry upfront in the design of the project to make them more circular. So to find schemes in terms of procurement where we can act upfront. And one way to do it, for example, I was mentioning for road, there are digital tools like we do with ORIS, and there will be others, obviously. But I think this is really the key shift we have to do. There are a number of schemes. I know, for example, in the UK now there's this kind of alliancing scheme, etc. In Singapore, they have other ones. But overall, this is the main message. Get the construction material companies and experts in front. And you have to bridge one complexity, is that this is a very, let's say, international engineered capabilities and skills, but the projects are very local. The materials that are available for one project might not be available for another one. So you have to combine both. So it's still a very local topic and very international skills. And digital can help really bridging this complexity. So that's my main message to the, and I know for procurement people, it's not that easy, but we have to bridge this gap and get the industry in front.
Yeah. And I think the example you took on roads, I mean, the potential, to go from 5% to potentially 50%, like apparently is done in Singapore, is obviously the potential is enormous there. So thanks for highlighting the need to be upfront, I guess.
And again, remember the 3,000 time pyramid. 3,000 pyramid of Gizeh every year. So let's reduce that and be smarter.
We close to the more plastic than fishes in the ocean. Maybe that'll be achieved through pyramids. So Vivek, I mean, obviously IFC is involved in a lot of structuring of those procurement or financing of projects. Any sort of view as to how that can be achieved from a procurement or maybe from a finance perspective from your experience?
So I don't think I have an answer to that one, but I just wanted to jump in on the previous point. I think I'm not a big believer in carbon taxes simply because they can be misused, but I think an indirect carbon tax, and I think Andrew alluded to it, where you can stipulate, and I think the EU has done that very well, that X percentage of plastic bottles need to be coming from recycled plastic. I would love for the garment industry and all my friends who produce sports shoes to say that. X percentage, what do you do with your pair of sneakers when you're done with them? It's a question I'm putting to everybody. So these are the kind of things that I would argue that this is one area where emerging markets or developing countries cannot say, oh, let the West do it and then we'll replicate. No, I think emerging markets should take the lead on that. Yeah. So across almost any sector, you can stipulate this. And I'm not a big believer in stringent laws, but this is one where I would personally argue for that. Yeah. In terms of procurement, it's a hard one because there is a cost to it. And obviously, it's about the short-term benefits as against what I would argue the medium-term gains. And I think that's a no-brainer. So what we try and do is to try and get a pot of money to either de-risk or to make the pricing more palatable when we I would say, when our standards are sort of such that you are required to, source some of it, which is recycled or reusable. So it's a matter of, it's basically about pricing at the end of the day. And where we come out is we would rather work with clients who believe in this, saying sometimes it's okay to sort of forego a bit of short-term gain for the medium term. And that's what sustainability is all about. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we almost run into an end, but there's a last batch of questions related, and it's a very difficult one to address, which is around what is the most effective policy, I guess, and policy in a sort of bigger sense. There's some questions around, should we go sort of fiscal way, or is there sort of better ways, better incentives? And I think I'll just add to ask the two panelists, so Joe and Philippe, maybe to talk about it. Joe, maybe from your experience as sort of planning and sort of policy advisor, maybe to sort of pinpoint maybe one to very quick highlight, and maybe Philippe as well from the incentives you talked about in terms of innovation and sort of co-funding those innovation. Maybe Joe, if you can start very quickly. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah. Very, very quickly, I think one of the very specific challenges in the construction industry is the fact that it's a very fragmented industry, and it's a complicated, value chain. Nicolas is advocating for, the material suppliers to be part of the conversation. We'll be advocating for the designers and planners to be part of the conversation. And bringing that together with investors and policymakers. And I think this is one of the fundamental challenges. And I think that that's compounded by procurement. And particularly for major infrastructure projects, we have, for good reasons, we have, very complicated procurement processes that also cause very significant breaks in the process. Which actually, almost in many cases, the procurement process creates a barrier to achieving a circular economy. And these are some very practical issues that we need to be thinking about how we overcome.
Thank you, Joe. Philippe?
I'm not sure I would have a lot to add to what Joe just said, but I think in the construction industry in Canada, and perhaps it's like that, as Joe mentioned, it's highly fragmented and composed of, relatively small players in our sector, which, makes investment and innovation sometimes quite hard. And I think that in our particular case, investing rather on the carrot side, where, you provide some incentives to develop R&D, to invest in R&D and to develop new processes would be a good start. Having, very stringent procurement requirements or recycling requirements, I think would not work particularly well in our province. But going forward, I think that might be needed. I think at the beginning, investing in, positively providing subsidies and incentive programs would help make the industry take a turn.
Thank you so much to Philippe and all the panelists. Obviously, we're running out of time, and so I would like to thank all of you for those great insights and sort of responding to the questions. There was actually a lot more questions. We had almost like 30 questions from the audience. And so obviously this is the, we're just halfway through that work, and also analyze the questions and continue to work with the panelists here. But thanks so much. And now I am going to hand over to CEO Marie-Laine Fendo for closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you all for your participation today. And really also special thanks to our speakers of today's panel for sharing their perspective and really valuable insights. I believe we could have listened to their insights for much longer. So we are a bit over time, but let me summarize very briefly, I think, the key messages that we've heard today. And I think that really starts by what one of the panelists said, which is business as usual is not possible anymore. And so it's really important now to consider that landfill space is actually getting stretched in many parts of the world. So it's actually really a constraint that is imposed on us. And also that circular economy is not an extra cost. You've heard from another panelist that it's often more affordable than traditional solutions around sustainability. It also can leverage private sector demand to finance initiatives related to sustainability, which is important in light of the current fiscal constraint. And also that there is an opportunity for all countries around the world, and there is an opportunity not only for them to advance circular economy only, but fostering this for innovation. And one of the other key messages I heard, which is really start to design your circular economy strategy based on your local priorities, right? I think it's quite important also to think that some of the solutions for the circular economy would be also local solution. And I think probably where a lot of the panelists concurred was really around the fact that there is a big room to collaborate internationally to craft innovation solutions around policy and financing. And that really starts with exchange and learn from countries' best practices, which we actually started today. And ultimately, I think that all of those different points that I raised are really making the link very strong with the G20 priorities agenda that we have under the Italian presidency and sustainable infrastructure, but also more broadly how it links to infrastructure as an asset class when you want to be able to leverage market demand, the QI agenda, and also the infotech agenda because of the innovation that circular economy is fostering for infrastructure. So I hope you found this workshop informative and useful. And as you heard from Henry, there has been still a lot of questions that there were still in the chat that we haven't been able to answer. But if some of you on the IWG you want to follow up to be able to have some response to those questions, feel free to reach out to us. And also you could contact us at any point of time if you wish to get involved and participate in the work that the GI Hub is doing around the circular economy and infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, we are also currently working on this circular economy roadmap, and the draft for this will be available for comments by the June Infrastructure Working Group meeting. This roadmap will provide a high-level guidance on how to transition infrastructure towards a circular economy. So please get in touch if you're interested in being part of that engagement ahead of the next meeting. Also, on another tool that you have been hearing about end of January, which is about innovative funding and financing tool, we are actually expanding it with case studies related to circular economy. So the tool is designed to help governments understand their options, identify frictions in the market, and access solutions to improve the quality and quantity of projects attractive to private sector investors. So if you would like to submit your own case studies, also please contact us. Meanwhile, I really look forward to reporting back to the IWG on the outcome of this workshop next week. And before we close the meeting, I'd like to ask you to participate in a simple and short poll to provide the GI Hub with feedback on today's workshop. And you will be able to access this poll via the Slido app that you have been very successful at using. And maybe also, if I may ask, if all of the participants would feel happy to turn on their video so we could take a family photo, I think that would be a great thing to do right now. So I'll let you some time to figure out if you feel like putting your video on. Obviously, there is no pressure, but that would be great to be able to take this picture with you all. I can't see all the other little picture coming up, so there might be some technical difficulties. But anyway, I don't want to take too much more of your time. And I would like again to thank you again. I really would like to wish you all a good day, afternoon, evening, and night, wherever you are. And I would like to particularly thank our G20 colleagues based in Asia Pac who stayed up very late, and our colleagues in the Americas who joined us very early in a true international cooperation spirit. And last but not least, thanks to the GI Hub team for enabling this event. There is Pam, Jordana, Monica, Danielle, Henry, and many more, and Angelique. So thank you to the team for staying up late over here in Sydney. And I wish you to stay well and safe, and thank you all.